Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has acknowledged that Russia has sustained significant losses of troops in Ukraine. In an interview with Sky News, he called it a huge tragedy for Russia. It's a rare admission by Russian officials of military losses. But Mr. Peskov said that Russia still hopes to reach its goals in the coming days. Russia's defense ministry reports that between 1,000 and 2,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, but independent estimates put the number closer to 10,000. I'd like to welcome now Jack Watling. He's a military analyst at the UK defense and security think tank RUSI. Very warm welcome, sir. Thank you for taking out the time to take our questions. A surprising admission by Russia that it has suffered substantial losses. What's your read on that?
So the Russians have taken very substantial losses, and they don't have many more troops to commit, which means that this next operation in the Donbas, they have a limited amount of time before they will need to make some difficult choices about mobilizing reserves and retaining conscripts from the last round. Now, if they do that, they need to prepare the population to admitting that they're at war and explain why that's necessary. And so I think what we're seeing is they're preparing the ground to have options in terms of generating more combat units in around a month's time.
Now, we started our broadcast with the deadly train station attack. Is a rocket strike on a railway station in eastern Ukraine another sign of Russia's campaign of intimidation, or is this a typical pattern of warfare by Russian forces?
It's difficult to tell with this specific strike because attacking rail infrastructure, which is the primary source for logistics for both the Russians and the Ukrainians, is a military target and does make sense. At the same time, the Russians have been striking using these ballistic missiles tactical targets responsively, where they clearly have ISR, so surveillance and reconnaissance of the target. And we know elsewhere that they have deliberately conducted attacks against civilians. And so the question arises whether this is a terror tactic. It could be either way. And I think we need more evidence before we jump to conclusions on that. But it's tragically plausible.
Now, the war seems to have entered another phase with Russia turning its attention or focus on Donbas region. What's your assessment of both sides at this stage?
So there's roughly numerical parity between the Ukrainian defense in the Donbas and the forces attacking them, which is not a great sign for the Russians. But a lot of the Ukrainian forces are fixed along the line of contact by ongoing artillery bombardment and harassment from mobilized civilians in Donetsk and Lugansk. And so the Russian attack will likely come around their flanks from the north and the south and try and encircle those formations. The real question is whether the Russians have enough combat power to close off that encirclement. If they do, then the Ukrainians will find it very difficult to resupply their units, and then they're on, they can only fight so long as they have ammunition and water and food. If the Russians fail to close the circle, then the Russians are very likely to run out of combat power in about 4 weeks.
In conclusion, if Russia does manage to take control of the Donbas region and achieves the land bridge to Crimea, which is apparently one of its objectives, would that be enough of a win for President Putin, or are we likely to still have a very protracted war continue even after that?
It would be enough of a short-term success that he could claim to have achieved something, but I don't think it would be the end of hostilities against Kiev. And from the Ukrainian side, why would they accept a ceasefire that essentially amounts to allowing the Russians to annex more and more of their country every couple of years? So I don't think it will be an end to the fighting. I don't think the Ukrainians would accept an end to the fighting on those terms. And so we are looking at a protracted conflict, which will likely go up and down in intensity, but nonetheless persist.
Just want to get a final thought from you. As you point out, with the risk of the conflict becoming drawn out, and obviously the war is getting worse, the longer this continues, in whose advantage is it?
It partly depends. If the Russians decide to mobilize their reserves and go onto a war footing, then they can bring very considerable numbers of troops to bear. If they don't do that, then their prospects diminish over time. And so the Russians really have a strategic choice to make about is Ukraine worth putting their entire national effort into seizing? Because they will become very vulnerable in other theaters if they continue to try and seize the country.
Jack Watling, defense and security think tank RUSI, thank you so very much. We greatly appreciate your time. Thank you.